far as I'm concerned, the pre-writing stage of any writing project is the most fun. That's where you can just let the ideas flow and you can entertain any idea and you don't have the responsibility of making an actual decision yet. So just all vistas are open. And that, for me, is amazing. My eyes grow big as I think about this idea and that idea, and only loosely do I think about how I'm going to put them all together. So for me, it's great. And that's what we're going to do on this video. I'm going to continue the pre-writing elements of my 30-day story challenge. So please join me and let's write. During the last video, I introduced this month's writing challenge, which is based on a call for submissions that is using the parameters of Dog Save the Queen. Although I think they've gone on and they've changed that to Dog Save the King. Either way, that's the challenge. And what I came up with last time was that I wanted my main character to be a dog, because that's going to make it as different as possible from the other writers who will be submitting. So different from my competition, which increases my chances of being accepted for the publication. And if you're wanting to write and hopefully submit and be picked up by the anthology, that's the kind of mindset that you'll want to be following as well. What can you do to make your story different from all the others? I've already decided that the main character of my story is going to be based on a creature in the Dungeons & Dragons universe called a blink dog. But I don't want to get in trouble with Wizards of the Coast for using any of their copyrighted material. So instead, this is going to be a porthound, or maybe a flicker hound, or maybe a flash hound. Those are all lovely alternatives to the teleportation or port word that I looked up in my handy-dandy thesaurus, right? And let's face it, porthound, that just is kind of a stupid name, so I don't want to go there. And a flicker hound, when I hear that, what that makes me think of is a big ferocious dog standing in front of me, and that image flickers back and forth. First it's here, then it's there, right? Making it very hard to hit, making it a fierce opponent in battle. Okay. But not what I really expected or was thinking of originally for the story. Then we have the flash hound, and in my mind, I see this creature running, and all of a sudden it gets a burst of speed, and it boom, catches up with opponents from behind it and takes them down. Okay, very cool. Different than the blink hound, but still not what I had originally in mind. However, the point of mentioning both of these is to demonstrate how you can start with something familiar, and by time you're done working with it, it is something of your own. It's your own design. It's your own creature. So I'm going to be moving away from Blink Dog to a Portal Hound. And what's the difference between a Portal Hound and a Port Hound? So when I think of a Port Hound, I think of teleport. And generally when creatures in science fiction teleport, there's often a noise associated with it, a clap, because the air... their body is gone and the air rushes in and makes a clapping sound, and I don't want that. So instead, these creatures have the ability to open up a portal, and then they can step through that portal, and that means that they can come in from behind silently. And that's what I originally pictured in my mind of what I wanted this creature to do. Not only that, Portal Hound is way better sounding than Port Hound, in my opinion. So that's what I'm going to be doing, is this main character is going to be a Portal Hound. All right, I'm going to go back briefly to the idea of customizing your story. So this is what writing is really all about. So I have mentioned in a previous video that there's only like a limited number of stories, basic story types. And some people argue that there's only 4, some say there's 7, some say there's 12. And I'll give you an example. I don't want to go into this. We'll do that more down the road. But man versus man. That's a story about a person that has some sort of conflict or opposition with another person. All right. So there's a huge amount of variation that can go on with that. I mean, because whatever the problem is, whatever the conflict is, it could be wanting to win a race. It could be wanting to kill someone. It could be trying to attract the attention of a love interest. I mean, and just so the amount of stories that you can make from that basic premise that two people may either want the same goal or only one of them may achieve their goal. And as soon as one achieves their goal, the other is no longer able to achieve theirs. I mean, so there's a lot of room for that. And that's what I mean. It's really all in the details, because whatever those details go into the story, that's what makes it great, and that's what makes it interesting, and that's what makes it different from what your competition is writing. Let me give you an example of these main variations. So one of them is man versus man. And in those stories, we have two people with goals that either oppose one another or are mutually exclusive, meaning as soon as one obtains that goal, the other cannot obtain theirs. So there's endless variety already in that. But if you go ahead and change man versus man to robot versus man, then we add a whole nother level of distinction, of originality, because we have now a robot that's having to face the same challenges that a man normally would change. And of course, the outcomes and the perceptions that we can get out of that, the ideas that we can generate, really add up. I mean, they're really amazing. They're wide open. It's like adding a whole new category because we changed that one factor. And in the same way, a story about a flicker hound is going to be different than a story about a flash hound, and is going to be different from a story about a portal hound. All of those changes give me more options, a huge variety of options that weren't available to me before. And they also help set the tone and the flavor of the story. All right, then we're going to move on to the second character, which is the queen. And even though she's not the main character, she's going to be very important. We're not going to be seeing the story through her eyes, but she's going to be there for most of the scenes. And whatever she does, it has a huge impact on the story as well. So I've already got the portal hound, and that is science fiction. A dog that's been genetically modified to be able to teleport, to be able to open portals and go through them. So for her, I want something a little bit different as well. I don't want her to be the standard royalty, the standard princess, the standard queen, because just like with the dog, I want a character that is going to separate me from my competition, right? And so for this, I've decided that I want her to have psionics. And what psionics are is mental powers, if you're not familiar with that term. And why? Because traditionally in a lot of the stories we have, especially, fantasy stories, you've got a queen, you've got a princess, and they can use magic of some sort. Well, psionics is kind of like the high-tech version, the science fiction version of magic. So she can do things with her mind that other people can't do. And why do I want to go that route? I mean, already we've got the special dog that can teleport, because I kind of love that there's a juxtaposition here that we have the dog, and physically it has an ability, and it kind of fits more in with fantasy, the fantasy of the blink dogs of D&D. And of course, we're not going to call them blink dogs, and we're not going to do that, but we are going to mention the history of these creatures, that they're based on mythological creatures that didn't really exist, with powers that never existed in dogs before, right? So we have a physical fantasy character, and then with the queen, we have a mental power, and it's like magical, but it's sci-fi. We've changed it away from the fantasy, and now it's science fiction. And I like how we have the physical and the mental, the fantasy and the sci-fi kind of all wrapped up in a way in this story. Now, obviously, it's all high-tech and it's all science fiction, but there's a little bit of a feel of fantasy along with it. We see some familiar tropes, familiar fantasy tropes in our science fiction story, and that makes it original and makes it stand out. And also by using elements that are familiar, the setting is not too off. It won't put our readers too off balance by thinking it's just too strange and too hard for them to be able to recognize from standard storytelling. So we do want to draw a little bit off of the standard and recognizable for the comfort of our readers. But the rest is different enough. I mean, so we've accomplished by this making it new, but yet recognizable. And that's excellent. The final thing that I'm going to work on in this pre-writing stage is the setting. The settings are so important. But once again, what I'm doing in this stage is finding ways to set up my story so that it is original. And in this, I'm going to go with, okay, so our secondary character is royalty. She's a queen. And I don't want this to be the standard fantasy royalty. They've got castles and they have banquets and knights and everything. I'm not exactly, right? And I don't want to take that and turn it into just a science fiction version of that, which there's nothing wrong with that. And that would definitely make it less likely to be seen in someone else's story. I want to go really original. So for me, these noble houses, these royalty, they're part of corporations. So I want to make my setting one where it is nobility, it is royalty, but they're corporation-based rather than the standard royalty that we see. How am I going to do that? I don't know. But I know that that is a feel that I think is going to be original. In fact, I think that if I can nail it, this is going to be another story that has potential for a much bigger, much longer story to spring from it. People are going to go like, that was such a cool concept. That was such a cool story world. We want to see more in it. So that's my third and final thing I'm going to do to make this a different standout story. The nobility, the royalty, and have them somehow intricately tied with corporations. I can see already some ideas, some scenes for what about a banquet? I mean, you think of royal banquets, but if it was a corporation, how would that royal banquet be instead? And the term hostile takeover, all right? We think of that in modern terms, as lawyers going into a courtroom and, buying extra shares. But what would that look like if these corporations were based on royalty? That royalty was running these corporations. What would that be? Now, a merger, okay, actually that fits in really well because we just have a marriage. We have two companies. And the important prince or princess marries, a key noble person in the other house, and now there's a merger, right? So just being able to do that, even if the only thing I do is kind of tweak the languages that we see so that it applies to the other side of the spectrum, like I did with mergers, that will be enough, I think, to make it unique. But I want to go more. I want this concept to affect the thinking of the characters. I want it to affect the plot. I want it to affect the culture, everything we see here, and so on in the story. I want it to be affected by this setting. I hope you can see what all of this pre-writing has done for the story. It has given me 3 great ideas to make my story different from the competition. So the dog, the teleporting dog, the psionic queen, and the corporate ruling families, the corporate nobility. All right, I put all those together, and yes, no one is going to be writing a story like mine and submitting it. Except that, no one but people who might have watched these videos and thought that my ideas were good and like they're going to write their own version of it. And I'm okay with that. That's all right. The real proof in a story is in the writing. Two people can write the same story. They have the same premise, be given the same footnotes on it, and when they're done, those are going to be very different stories. So if you like my ideas, go ahead, feel free to copy them and write your own story based on them. But I really encourage you to do your own. Do what I've done. Take a look at what elements you want there and how to make them unique. And so in our 3-sentence story challenges, our 1-day story challenges, I talked about the beginning of a story. How there's a who, there's a when, there's a where, there's a what, there's a why. All right, so those are kind of the elements that I've been picking on. So the princess, or the queen and the dog, I did who twice. I got 2 different who's, and then the where. That's the royalty and the corporations combined, because that's part of the setting, right? But you could clearly work more on the plot. You could choose to go with where, like I did, but you might want to go with when. Maybe your story takes place in a really different time frame. Maybe it's the prehistoric ages, right? A dog and a boy or a girl in prehistoric days, and maybe it's not a traditional dog. Maybe it's like a lizard dog, right? It's a pre-dog, whatever those might have been. Do some research or make something up. As long as you call it a dog, they might accept that in the anthology, all right? It could be the plot. You find a way to introduce a really different plot line, a different way the villain wants to conquer the world or oppose the hero. I mean, whatever it is. I'm going to leave that up to you to develop your own story. And I think you'll find if you take this time to do some pre-writing and say, how can I make this setting different? How can I make these people different? How can I make this basic plot different? That you are going to find that you continue to present stories that stand out from the competition. I just want you to know that the entire story benefits from this pre-writing experience. The tone, the plot, the characters, everything can really benefit by having some ideas in your mind as you start the actual writing process. So I highly recommend it. So what did you do? What did you come up with? What story ideas jumped to your mind? What ways to make it different did you develop during your pre-writing phase? I really would like to see what everyone else is doing, and if you would, please include it in the comment section. Let me know. Who's your main character? Where does this take place? How do you plan to incorporate both a dog and a royalty together in the same story? If you want, we can do some brainstorming. Put some comments in there. I'll be happy to respond. Hopefully other people will too. I'll get the ball started by making a few comments on my own. And please, feel free to respond to those. Do you like them? Do you think I'm on the right trajectory for a great story? Or do you think that I'm just lost my mind somehow? And that's okay. It wouldn't be the first time someone has correctly noticed that I've lost my mind. All right. Until next time, later.